Proper bureaucratic family. His father was a school inspector in the Volga region. He was a liberal, not a radical. A man who believed in reform and believed in education as a way of improving Russia. However, his brothers and sisters all were involved one way or another in radical movements. His elder brother, as is well known, was executed for taking part in the plot to assassinate the Tsar. However, the interesting thing is that there is no evidence that until he graduated from high school and went to university, Lenin had any radical ideas at all. He was a very dutiful student, got gold medals every year. I think what changed him was the fact that he was expelled from the university for a very minor misdemeanor, for participating in a riot, which was not political. And when the authorities found out that he was the younger brother of a man executed for an attempt to murder the Tsar, he was expelled and not allowed to return to the university for a number of years. I think during that period he felt there was such an injustice was done to him. He developed all these very radical ideas, and that hatred, which was his driving force against Tsarism and against the bourgeois society which made this possible, was born then. I think if he had not been expelled from the university, he may well have gone on to make a brilliant bureaucratic career and worked for the Tsarist government.
I remember two pictures of me taken when I was 5. One where I'm sitting on a horse in the Moscow Zoo, and the other one where I'm standing in front of Lenin's tomb on Red Square. I'm sure that the horse in the zoo is dead by now. As for Lenin, he was dead, and he was not dead. He was everywhere. I was about 5 years old when my parents took me for the first time to see Lenin in the mausoleum. I remember we were standing in a long line, even longer than the lines in the grocery stores. And as usual, I began to cry. I wanted to go to the bathroom, I wanted to go home. I didn't want to see Uncle Lenin. Then, when we finally got into the mausoleum, I saw him. He looked exactly like in the pictures, except in the pictures he was smiling, and here he was staring at the ceiling. Everybody was silent. I wanted to get closer to Uncle Lenin, but the guard whispered to us that we had to go. I remember this woman outside told me that I shouldn't cry, because when Lenin was a little boy, he had never cried. I turned to my father and asked if Uncle Lenin had ever wanted to go to the bathroom. After that, my father made this picture of me, standing on Red Square.
I thought it was sick, morbid, and it's a horrible phenomenon. A horrible phenomenon. It's very difficult to know with what to compare it. As you know, the body itself looks completely unlifelike, looks like wax, and as I understand it, articles by scientists who worked in this area have been published recently, which lead to one to suppose that almost nothing remains of the original body.
I have always deliberately avoided going into it. I have never gone in there, and I never shall. I don't want to pay homage to this man.
It's not clear to me to what extent people really interiorize the image of Lenin. I think until fairly recent years, there was a widespread acceptance, degree of conditionedness by Soviet propaganda. As you know, this began from the first years in school. Lenin as a godlike figure who bestowed presents and so on, looked after children. And I think to a large extent this did rub off on Soviet people.
Like millions of the Soviet kids, I went to school when I was 7. Teachers in school told us that we were going to be very special people when we grew up, that we were going to live in a very special society where people will be equal to each other and where everyone will give to this society what he can and will receive what he wants. They told us that this kind of society is called communism. I guess teachers of my teachers told them the same stuff, and they desperately wanted us to achieve what they hadn't achieved. Our teachers told us that Lenin's revolution was just the first step to communism. It marked the beginning of the long way. In the 1930s, Comrade Stalin proclaimed that we had finally built socialism. In the 1950s,